Our first speaker this morning is Anne-José Villeneuve of Indiana University, giving a talk titled, "You can try to take a minority language out of France, but you can't take it out of French."
And there's a subtitle which kind of sells my great suspense, the influence of Picard on regional French. So far in the conference we've been talking about several minority languages in Europe, which is very clear from the colorfulness of this map. We also talked about the Charter for Minority and Regional, the Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, which was adopted in 1992, signed by France in 1999, and as Patrick McRae said yesterday, it has yet to be ratified by France, so it's not in effect in France. In fact, Article 2 of the French Constitution says that the language of the Republic is French. Well, that's pretty clear. Even though they added recently in 2002 an article that recognizes the cultural aspect of regional languages. So regional languages are part of France's heritage. Still not recognizing them as in terms of preservation. So in France, according to Errand and Al 2002, regional languages are in sharp decline. So from Alsatian, Basque, and Corsican, which are between 47 and 66%. So this is the rate of transmission. So the loss of transmission from one generation to the next generation. And the question from the 1999 census was, if your parents spoke to you in the regional language, do you yourself speak to your own children in the regional language? And this is the rate of loss of those regional languages. Catalan and the Langauges in the north of France, more than 70% loss, and then the Languedoc and other regional languages, including Breton, more than 90% loss. So it's a pretty grim picture for regional languages. The language that I'm going to be focusing on today is Picard, and it's part of the Languedoc group of languages. So far we've talked about the influence of the minority languages and the dominant language, but we've mostly focused on the influence of the dominant language on the regional language. My question today is, does the regional language also affect the dominant language? So is there a reverse effect? If we're talking about convergence, it might, we presumably go in both directions. And another question that I'll be focusing on today is if the regional language influences the dominant language, what kind of evidence do we need to ascertain that influence, to assess the influence? According to many researchers, there is such a thing called regional French. So some people have called it an intermediate between the dialect or the regional language and standard French. It's what remains of the dialect or of the regional language once it has vanished. And so in terms of influences, the regional French has features from both standard French, colloquial French in the general sense, and also regional languages. So I conducted some field work in the Vimeo area of Picardy in 2006 and 2007. It's an area where Picard still enjoys a good vitality, as was very clear from Jean-Luc and Delphine in your presentation on Thursday, and from Julie Auger's work as well. So I collected the data with social networks. So I had a main informant, who it's no secret that Jean-Luc was my main informant, and then he gave me contacts of people who I could interview in the region. So I chose people who spoke Picard, but also monolingual people from the region, so monolingual people in French. I conducted 42 interviews, about 45 to 75 minutes long, informal conversation. The topics of conversation varied from childhood, stories, very interesting stories sometimes, language use, and local customs and activities. And one important thing is that subjects were specifically told, even the bilingual ones, that the interview was to be conducted entirely in French. So what they were speaking in their mind was French. For this talk, I'm focusing on 31 subjects. So Some bilingual, some monolinguals, and then between elders, what I call elders, and then the adults. The reason I chose 55 years old as a cutoff point is that there was a law in France where education became compulsory until the age of 16, and then when people who were younger than 55 years old, that's when they were entering the school system, about 18 hours of course. So the first thing that people pointed out is that there is an influence of the regional language on French. So this speaker says, well, when we speak French, there are Picard words in our French speech. These are a few examples, expressions. So of modality, in French we would say je suis en train de parler, and some people in Picardie might say je suis en route à parler. Un orzin, which I believe Jean-Luc talked about a little bit yesterday, and then de la vraie vie, which is a mix of Picard and French. That's very interesting, but this is not the main focus of my talk, because words can be preserved, but it doesn't mean that there's a lasting effect on the structure of French. So, when we're talking about structures, this is also pointed out by some of the subjects. So most people don't speak pure Picard, and when they want to speak French, they use Picard structures. And for purists, it's not pure French. So this was encouraging for me. So these are a few features that have been noticed in Picardie French. So subject doubling, things like Mario y mange, Mario y chante, as a Mario y chante as opposed to Mario chante in standard French, so no subject doubling. The pronunciation of plural elle, so ils sont ici, even when it's feminine. The pronunciation of the relative qui, so which is reduced to que. Les gars qu'on jamais gagné. Maybe I'm hungry. And final obstruent liquid cluster simplification. So things like propre, which is pronounced propre. So this is what I'll be focusing on today. So the absence of the liquid in word final OL clusters is pointed out in Picard. Is very widespread, even though the liquid is preserved in derived words, for instance, adverbs. So we know that the liquid is there underlyingly, but it automatically deletes at the end of words. It's also pointed out in French. So then says that at the end of word, the liquid is deleted before a consonant, which makes sense. And Cornulier says, well, before a consonant, but it's also possible in other environments, but it's a little négligé before vowels. So in a study that I conducted previously, I found that elders do delete a lot more than younger speakers, and bilinguals also delete more than monolingual speakers. So this might be an indication that perhaps Picard is having an effect. So because the main factor was age, I separated my group into the elders and the adults and conducted and ran another analysis. And I found that for the bilinguals, for the elders, there is a significant difference between the bilinguals and the monolinguals, but when we get to the younger speakers, there's no difference between the bilingual and the monolingual. There isn't a significant difference either between, follow me here, the monolingual elders and then the bilingual adults. So I posited that the monolingual adults might have had much less contact with Picard, even though they don't themselves speak Picard. The older monolinguals were around Picard a little bit more, so they're a little bit more affected by Picard, and then of course the bilingual elders have clear Picard influence. This is obvious in the patterns. So like Deb was pointing out that OL simplification is possible before consonants. Same pattern between the elders and the younger speakers. However, there's a clear difference between the rates of simplification before vowels, where Cornulier says that it's stigmatized. It seems like the older speakers are not affected by this stigmatization. So perhaps there's a Picard influence there, and they're just importing the grammar from Picard and generalizing it to French, whereas the younger speakers are conscious of that stigmatization, and they're not reducing before vowels. So could there be could the age difference point to a contact effect from Picard? Perhaps. Although they may not speak Picard, the monolingual elders who were born before 1953 are more likely to have heard Picard on a daily basis when they were growing up. This is all nice and well, right? A well simplification, present in Picard, but also present in colloquial French. So how do we make sure that this is coming from Picard, right? This is also the case, unfortunately, for the other features, right? Subject doubling is present in Picard, all great, absent from standard French, but it's present in colloquial French elsewhere. So how can there be a certain Picard influence where Picard is not spoken? We can't really say that. So I decided to look at 3 more features that are present in Picard, but completely absent from other varieties of colloquial French. So the first feature is pour plus accusative infinitive. This is something that happens in English. I came here, or I called you for you to give me an information, right? This is not something that we do in French. Vowel epenthesis, things like je viens de parler, or maybe not. That's not the best example. I'll give you some examples in a few seconds. And the invariable pronunciation of toute as a determiner. So toute la journée in standard French, but toute la journée for some people in Picardie. So for plus accusative and plus infinitive is noted in Picard, although it's a little rare according to conversations that I've had with Jules Auger. Things like it was suffisant pour y vivre, for him to live. Ça sera pour casser la croûte. So, pour vous casser la croûte, c'est I don't speak Picard French. So, for you to have a bite. It's also been noted by some researchers, by a few researchers in the Picardie region. So, ce malheureux n'a pas de pain pour lui manger, and in standard French, we wouldn't have that pronoun. Le jardin est grand, nous avons de la place pour nous jouer. So, pour jouer in standard French. So it has been noted, but the question is it present in the data? And it is. So I found 2 examples in 2000 actually it was a speaker I interviewed in 2007, 2 examples in my whole corpus. So this is not very frequent, but surprisingly, I mean, something that surprised me tremendously is that the one speaker who does use this construction is a monolingual speaker. Right? So it's not someone who speaks Picard, but he's 63 years old, and he claimed in his interview that his parents spoke Picard, but never to him. Well, even people like me, my mother is Haitian. I heard Haitian when she was really, really mad, and when she was talking on the phone. I picked up some Creole, even though I never spoke Creole until I was in my late 20s, right? So these are a few examples.
Alors pendant cette saison-là, on a des jours pour nous arracher des betteraves.
For us to pull the beets, so he's a beet farmer.
Des pois verts qui sont mis pour les gens manger. Alors.
So for people to eat, right? This is not something that happens in French. It's widespread in English, but not in French. But this is a little weak, right? So the second feature is vowel epenthesis in monosyllables, things like de and le and me and te and things like that. In French, very widespread. In Picard, the vowel occurs before the consonant. So things like, oh, well, Jean-Luc, would you like to?
La première.
On va nous-mêmes.
Ovnem deixem l'express damien.
Right. So you have 2 patterns, right? The first example where the vowel occurs before the consonant, so this kind of pattern, and then the other one which has more of a French pattern, right? It has been noted by the same researcher in French, so in Picardie French, elle allume le feu. Un sac de pommes, not habitual in my speech, and ils veulent me battre. So this is not the pattern that happens in French all the time. So does this happen in my corpus? Well, yes, right. So the researcher who noticed that in the 50s was an outsider who was coming to Picardie and noticed things that he had never heard elsewhere, right? But there's no lasting record, there's no recording, there's no empirical data apart from observations, right? So things like
Les femmes de 40 ans à l'époque,
S'ils n'ont pas l'habitude de parler vicaire, ça a beaucoup plus de mal à passer.
plus de mal à passer. So if you look at this example, for instance, some people in French might say, well, it's the previous word's final schwa that's just appearing with the following word. Well, plus doesn't have an underlying schwa, right? And even in the same couple, we have the alternation between the two patterns. So this was a very fortuitous example that I found in my corpus. So this is a couple. So some of the interviews were done in couples, and the woman says sur le terrain, and then the husband echoes sur le terrain.
On commençait à nous apprendre le métier d'agriculteur.
sur le terrain.
Sur le terrain.
Sur le terrain. And I go, oh, sur le terrain, because I just can't say sur le terrain, it's not in my speech, right? In an article that hopefully will be coming out soon, we found that the Picard pattern, even though it's not later. Even though the French pattern is more prevalent, the Picard pattern occurs in a non-negligible proportion, 20%. And the last feature that was looked at by Auger and Petrush in 2009, so the pronunciation of the neutralization of tout as tout. This is clearly the Picard patterns, right? More than 80% of feminine phrases pronounced as tout. So toucher gosse, it's all good, it's masculine, but also toucher dans régional, which is feminine. So does it occur in French? It was pointed out in phrases like elle était tout perdue, but these are adverbs, right? So the question is, does this occur as a determiner? And there is no record of that. So I found several examples in my corpus, things like so it's perhaps not very clear for people in the back, but people in the front might be able to. Yeah. But there's a clear difference between males and females, right? None of the females that I interviewed do that. I'm still scratching that question, whether it's a question of schooling. When you're a female, when you're a French female, people beat into you that you have to do the agreement, and it's very, very clear that you're supposed to be speaking as a female. So perhaps there's a little bit of that influence. But the difference between the monolinguals and the bilinguals, so of course the males, no difference, and then there's no difference in age as well. So this last feature is a little bit more rare because there are very few examples in my corpus, but it's still an example. So it seems like in order to ascertain the influence of the minority language on French, we not only have to look at features that appear in that variety of French, so things like OL simplification, but we also have to look at features that differentiate that variety from other varieties of colloquial French. So we can't be comparing regional French with standard French. We have to compare it with colloquial French from elsewhere in order to ascertain that influence. So, despite a decline in parent-child transmission, regional languages feature remain present in French, and in order, which is exactly what I said, so in order to ascertain that influence, we have to look at features that are special and not things that appear in other varieties of colloquial French. Thank you.